Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show this week is Books, Bots, and the New Rights Economy, how AI is rewriting publishing. And definitely a topic, as most of you know in the audience, I just published another book not long ago. And so I'm very interested in this conversation to see how it goes. I'm joined by Julie Trelstad, head of U.S. publishing at AMLET AI, among several other things. I know you're involved in a few other initiatives there, Julie. So
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me on. I just tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working in book publishing for 35 years, but have always been surfing the wave of the next new digital thing. Like I was the first editor to use desktop publishing at a magazine I worked at.
Nice.
I was early in on ebooks, and in fact, I worked for John Wiley
Mhm.
and Sons in the 90s. We did ebooks. We thought they were going to be more like software, that they were going to cost lots more than
Mm.
books. Not so much. And
Not
then,
so much.
no, and then the next thing that sort of happened after that was social media, which completely changed the way that authors promote and are expected to promote their book. So I've always sort of
Yeah.
been had one toe in the digital piece of publishing, even though I'm still very much a ink on paper kind of person. And I'm really excited to have just joined AMLET AI, which is a startup out of Europe
Mm.
and that will help authors register their work in a way that we want to call it the post scraping age, so that they will get paid and properly compensated for their work if it is used by AI.
Mm. I mean, obviously, a topic that I'm really interested in for personal reasons, as well as I think from a AI industry perspective, it's something that we really have to think through and address. And I've gone through both processes, right? In the 90s, I wrote a book that went through traditional publishing, and now I just did I guess you call me an indie author at this point.
Yeah,
I would have said self-published, but I like indie better. It sounds
I
good.
like it better too.
Yeah, it sounds cooler anyway. I don't know. So you've been to publishing a while, and you've seen the transitions that we've gone through over time, and you mentioned a couple there. Where do you think this current AI wave ranks in terms of disruption for authors and publishers, and then for the broader content ecosystem in general?
It's different. I don't think it's bigger or worse than what happened in the 90s
Mm.
when during the 90s there was like this huge consolidation in the publishing industry, and this is when I was new
Mhm.
to it. And I remember sort of before, in the before days, we sold books to bookstores, and there were more than 100 major publishers that were viable and
Mhm.
interesting and had median lists. And these publishers were run by book people, literary types who,
Right.
I did start my job at Wiley and find the bottle of vodka and the glasses in the drawer. It was like the martini lunch was just like still then. But since then, now we've winnowed ourselves down to 5 major publishers, maybe 20 that
Yeah.
are truly viable. And the people at the top of these publishing companies are much more corporate. They're driven by stock. They're not, it's not a literary motivated field.
Mm.
And at the same time, also starting in the early 2000s was the rise of self-publishing. And at
Mm.
this point in time in 2025, um, we almost have a 50-50 split in amount of revenue generated by
Mm.
traditional publishing and indie
Right.
publishing, as we should call it. The only problem is like you have five big players on one side and millions on the other, generating
Mm.
kind of the same amount of revenue. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, in a way, I still think indie publishing is dominated by the corporations, by Amazon in particular.
Mm.
So I don't think we're as free as we think we are, but there's some interesting new things evolving now, and AI
Mm.
can, I think, help the indie author. I'm an optimist about that.
Yeah, I mean, I admit I'm pretty optimistic about it, and it's a very different process. Even just kind of evaluating what I wanted to do this time versus 98, 99, when you published with a publishing house. That was what you didn't do that, you didn't get published, right?
Right.
Now it's considerably different, and just being able to use that book for building credibility and thought leadership, it's important for people in my business, and probably lots of others. So it was an interesting process to go through, and learn about. So I'm very curious, kind of, how how this is going to evolve now with AI, and also the idea of how I get money out of my IP versus not.
We'll talk about that, but the other hat I wear is I'm a book mentor or an author mentor at Paperbacks and Pixels, where I actually work
Mm,
with authors to help them navigate this, and we do use a lot of AI tools in my
yeah,
workshops, to help build market, and this is like, I think, a superpower that authors can have is, like, you can have this whole staff, um,
yeah,
used wisely,
yeah,
who can really help you bring your books to market. But then again, everyone has these tools, and and it also means we'll talk about this later, but books can be generated by AI in a click, and that's causing some problems right
yeah.
now.
Well, I mean, understandable, I guess, but well, so let's just, to help set a bit of a baseline. So for listeners that aren't really, authors, or really, know much about this space, can you walk us through, this idea behind ISCC identifiers and AMLET, and how this digital fingerprint is going to work, in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ISCC, which is the International Standard Content Code, is an
Mm,
ISO standard that was registered last year in Europe, by Titus Pan, who is the co-founder of AMLET along with Jacopo D'Angelo of StreetLib, who's the
mm,
CEO of StreetLib. So the two of them got together. The code was
mm.
created in direct relationship to the need in European countries because the law in Europe, and I think you know more about this than I do, the law in Europe requires that any AI or electronic media pays an author if they use
Yeah.
their intellectual property. That's not true in the US, but the
Mm.
problem was like this was done completely manually. And you did have the ISBN, which is the standard book number, the barcode you see on the
Right.
back. And that number is just something you assign randomly. It's not related to the content of the book. It is just given by the
Yeah.
publisher, and you can't really directly connect it. You do have copyright laws, but again, it's
Mm.
manual. Like these are books that are not stored digitally, and you have to have registered it properly to be able to make a claim. Eh,
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, just the ISBN process, because again, my first book, it was published by a publisher. They did all that. I had no idea, and this time I went out and I bought a block of 10 ISBNs. So,
Good.
7 of them are just sitting there right now, but it was a better deal. So,
Oh,
but
definitely, and as an indie author too, that allows you to create an imprint, and if you buy only one, by the way, and you use just the one ISBN, you get designated as self-published author on the publishing site, so it's a good idea to
Mhm.
buy all 3. But anyway, back to the ISCC, it's gonna be a new code like the ISBN,
Mm,
only it is based on the actual book's DNA. So you use the content of the book itself to create this particular code.
mm,
And what's really interesting is like you can have several variations of a book. Say you have the French language edition of the book, you have like the children's book edition, and you have like another one. They're going to be 90 something percent similar to each other, even though they're different because it is
mm,
the same content. Whereas,
mm.
the ISBNs have no relationship to each other. So
Right.
what this code does is it, without like actually having to compare the actual text of the book, it creates a DNA, which I think a lot about like the Dewey Decimal System in libraries, right?
Mm,
Who says like this is this kind of book. It's a fiction, nonfiction. It's in this category. It's written by this. It has. I think it goes down to like 130 identifiers, like switches on
mm.
and off, like a DNA. Really, it just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
says, without being the content, but it represents the content of the book in a machine readable way so that
Mm,
somebody using an AI um, can compare this DNA footprint to another piece of content and say, "Oh, you stole it," or
mm,
this was originally belonging to this author."
mm.
Um, but we don't have anything now that is. allows a machine or a piece of
Yeah.
technology to figure out who owns a book.
Yeah, I mean that that's definitely been a big topic of discussion over the last 3 years or so around generative AI and all the training data and how do we make this fair? Just like the musicians went through before us when we went to streaming music, right?
Right.
Um, Now I know when we were talking about AMLET, you mentioned that you don't you're not actually ingesting the text itself, right? You're actually connecting metadata together with this I whatever it was. I lost the quote
With
here.
the ISCC,
ISCC.
yeah, well, actually,
Right.
to create the ISCC, you do need the book, but
Mm,
what happens is it will create that fingerprint,
mm,
but then the book content itself is not exposed, right? You just use the fingerprint as
mm,
something to judge other
makes
things
sense.
against. And if you are a publisher, what we can do, or you have a lot of books in a catalog, maybe we have
Mm,
some software that would allow you to privately create these fingerprints not on the web, and
mm,
so that it's done. We are building a system for individual authors, like you went and bought the ISBNs. In fact, the ISBN in the US, Bowker, is a
mm,
partner of ours and will
mm,
help, people access these codes.
mm,
We are working on being able to, like, allowing authors to upload their book. And you and I were talking about
mm,
earlier, this is we do have a relationship with Streetlib Distribution, same
yeah.
CEO, founder, um, that if you upload your book into that system, you'll be able to create inside of Streetlib, um, an AMLET ISCC in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just went through the street lab process this week because you told me about it actually.
Yeah.
But and it was interesting to see, and I could see how that would make sense inside of that environment. Then you just connect the fingerprint and you're protected. Um, much like I guess the Adobe licensing, DRM uh, process has been there for a while around all kinds of content, but not specific to books, right?
Right, and
So
this isn't like it can't be stripped away like DRM, right? So it
right,
it
right.
it is inherent in what the book is. Yeah.
Yeah, I shouldn't
So
admit that, but I do remember back in the day of having something that, took that off of songs. Not that I did that personally, but but I've heard that people did that, uh, which, is a thing, I guess. So there's a lot of fear, right, around, of authors and they feel like their work is, been scraped into into oblivion, basically.
yes.
What when what's the read on the emotional side of this kind of creator backlash? And I know we've had several lawsuits over the last couple of years. So,
Yeah, it's really funny. I was, recording a podcast yesterday with a poet literary person who was just ready
mm,
to just, you know, he I didn't realize it, but he booked me out of duress. He wanted to have an argument. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot
yeah,
of, like, black and white thinking, and, like, what I like to say is, like, this moment in history isn't gonna continue.
mm,
But yeah, like, these AI companies would have liked to acquire the data,
yeah,
legitimately, but it wasn't easy, and there was no so they pirated it. And these
right,
lawsuits had more to do they didn't really have they basically the ones that have settled so far basically said, "Well, totally okay for these companies to train on books." And I always make the point too that the word publish means literally to make public. These books
yeah,
belong to the public. Anyone can
right,
purchase it, they can use it and use it, but there are no standards for, like, how much a publisher or an author should charge for somebody to train on their AI
right,
model. And, like, nobody's doing this. Although I can say now, since this has happened in the last year, I do know that within some of the larger publishing companies, they are directly negotiating with
yeah,
OpenAI and Amazon. But it hasn't they didn't have that, and they like, "We need to move this technology forward." And so they went to these pirated databases,
right,
and they even, like, scanned in books, it wasn't all
yeah,
electronic. And, this is terrible because there was no compensation to authors. With the
right,
lawsuits, authors are probably gonna get compensated, but they're just gonna get compensated once, and if
mm,
these models that were trained can persist well into the future, it could be 10 years, 20 years. There can be so much use on
right.
authors' work that will never get additional money for, and also you had to have registered copyright. There were so many hoops that authors have to pass through to,
Yeah.
get compensated for this, and legit, it's bad. You
Yeah.
shouldn't steal people's work, and artists
Mm.
too, photographers, musicians.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as a photographer and in another lifetime, I actually did make money off of that. I mean, that's definitely another one of those things that is a little scary. I mean, and you hit a good point, I think, too, that we're in the middle of a big transition, and we've only been at this, 3 years or so, and until we have to figure out what the problems are to solve them, and then we have to figure out how to solve them. So it's a process. I mean, again, much like what happened with all the music streaming services that came along, and we're still seeing arguments about what that business model looks like. So I'm curious because we're kind of leading into this idea around business models. I mean, what how do we how do we do this with fairly for authors, other creators? Uh, something like this Spotify royalty layer, maybe, or
Yeah,
how do we do that, right?
yeah, that's exactly the infrastructure we have created for authors. And so there's basically, we've designated 4 different kind of rights that authors can sell. Well, one of them is like no rights at all. Like don't scrape, nothing. You're not allowed. Okay.
Right.
The second one is like research rights. Can So a lot of the problem right now is the LLMs were trained on all this knowledge. And our founders believe that future AI models are going to be smaller and more compact
Yeah.
and not have all
Yeah.
this stuff in it, but it will go out and go to the web and grab information
Mhm.
based on the query. So they won't be inherent in the model, but they will be part of
Yeah.
research.
Yep.
Um, so there's that, and then there's generative AI rights as to whether or not, and we talk about the difference between input and output rights. So input is like you suck it in and turn it into math. Basically, it's not
Right.
really
Right.
itself
Right.
anymore. It becomes part of like a data smoothie or a word smoothie, and it's no longer
Yep.
recognizable. But
Yep.
if I say, um, let's write in the style of this particular famous author, and you
Mm.
get a piece written that matches them, we call it output, so,
Right.
and that's not legit. You can't, if you are, then you're in a competitive situation with that author. There have been a couple of cases in fiction, like there was one last year where an author like left a prompt inside of um, her novel that said, write it more like so and so, who's her main competitor. Um, and whoops.
That's pretty smart, actually.
It's totally smart, but, I think the lawsuits like the Disney lawsuit that basically said it
Mhm.
can't match Daffy Duck or whichever character it is. It cannot match. You can't hold these side by side and say that you didn't steal
Mm.
this.
Yeah.
And so that's generative AI.
Yeah. I mean, it is complicated, right? It's not, and I do agree with your statement from the, from your founders that we're moving to a world where models are gonna be very different. And, yeah, there'll still be some massive trained on everything, the data that we can get kind of models, but the models that are gonna mean the most from an enterprise perspective are gonna be small models, mid-sized models, industry specific, role specific. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are going to limit that. And then, frankly, from an enterprise perspective, I work with companies and tell them all the time that look, you can't just turn this thing loose on your internal data either, because it'll ingest that as well. So, you have to use other technologies that we're working on to compartment that information away from the language model and use it when you need it, but not ingest it so that it'll be reused in ways you don't even know about, right?
Right, and that's exactly what could happen with books. I just sort of had the thought. I edited professional architecture books. They were reference
Mm.
volumes essentially, and we even created CD-ROMs of those. But those
Yeah.
can become, if it was an architectural AI application that helped people design, windowsills or, whatever detail of a building, um, wouldn't they want to buy the collected architectural books of Wiley and use that as training
Mm.
data for their model as opposed to like ingest everything random about building,
Right.
right? So like something that is professional grade information can become part of models. And then there's so many opportunities for people these days to develop apps of their own, and
Mhm.
having the ability to license books for either entertainment, education, or professional use is going to be the raw material from which they can make these new applications. And then the
Mm.
authors and creators can get paid for that. And
Yeah.
so when you mentioned Spotify, so we have a layer in AMLET that will actually break down the content into
Mm.
what we call tokens. That may be just a sentence or a paragraph, the images,
Mhm.
the captions, all the little pieces. And through the API, you will be able to identify how many tiny little pieces of the book get used in an AI application, and that would
Mm.
allow for a Spotify-like payment where people get used or paid every time they bring up that paragraph, even if
Mm.
it's not the whole book. So it's more like a lot of micropayments over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Hmm.
alternatively, they could get paid a lump sum for training, right? Where the book is just ingested, smoothieized,
Right.
and not used.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if you flip that around a little and think about that from the developer side, because certainly part of my audience are involved in the building of these things versus the using of them. What do you think from a developer perspective? How does this work for them? How do they tap into this? What's the developer experience, and how does that evolve over the next few years?
Yeah, what's really cool is our founders are developer and book people, like, in one. So, like, you can go to our
Mm,
AMLET AI now and grab the open API,
mm,
and right now, all that really lets you do is search, if something is available right now, and in the future, it's gonna be more refined and, like, will help you, identify the just right content for your works.
mm,
But, the whole thing is developed as a database. It's a database,
mhm,
and it is designed, and we've already been playing with some of the MCPs and, like,
mm,
putting this into Claude and being able to, like, just like you were talking about in the enterprise situation, where it's kind of a contained database that can
yeah.
be connected to another application.
Mm. Oh, that makes sense. So you can actually do that same sort of thing, like like RAG is one of the
Totally.
technologies there, right? And so yeah, if you can segment into that, so it protects it in a way, and then you meter out as you're used. That actually makes a lot of sense, and would certainly change the way that authors are compensated or or not compensated now, I guess.
Right. Well, hopefully they will be compensated. And
Yeah.
the key thing though is, like, because we're thinking about developers in literally developing this product, is that we want to make it as seamless and easy
Mm,
for them to do these transactions and to purchase the material as they need it, rather than, like, now you have to, like,
mm,
who owns the rights? Is it the literary agency? Is it the
right.
author? Is it the estate? And you have to hunt down, you have to write a letter and say what it's gonna be
Yeah.
used for, like, it's a pretty tedious process
Mhm.
to currently, to legitimately require rights to use.
Yeah, I mean, and publishing in general has been sort of manual, and you mentioned some of that from a workflow perspective. And I know when I worked with publishers before, it was very, manual and interactive, but very much not a digital process. And so, when it becomes API driven, instantaneous and global, I mean, is that part of what you believe will attract developers into this ecosystem, is the fact that it is going to be easy and manageable and all of that.
That, and we hope that indie authors and publishers join, that, like,
Mm,
it's gonna be both sides. We're gonna have to have great
right.
content on one side and really good high quality material, and on the other side, yeah, we wanna make it easy. And as I say, we're
Mm,
a brand new startup, we're just getting the word out, and, like, there's no other infrastructure like this,
mm.
um, to do this kind of work.
Yeah. I mean, definitely I've looked at this, for a bit as I was going through the process of both writing and then figuring out how to publish. This time, because it was different than it was, back in the late 90s. Certainly things have evolved a lot, and AI changes that as well. But it was just definitely different for me to try to see what the process looks like and how you manage it. And honestly, I'm sure a lot of authors get to the point where they end up hiring agencies or people to help them with parts of it, because it isn't It's not that easy, even for somebody who's very tech savvy. It's
Well,
complicated,
yeah, you can hire me as a fractional publisher if you like.
right? I mean, yeah. Um,
But,
I mean,
yeah.
it is, yeah. I mean, it's hard to navigate, I think. So, well,
And
so
honestly, you probably just do it once, right? Or maybe twice. So it's not something you definitely have to learn.
yeah,
But go
yeah. I
ahead.
mean, hopefully I do it a few more times, but I mean, you're right. It's not something I'm going to do often. It's takes a while, I guess.
Mhm.
Which kind of leads me to this next one, and you mentioned this earlier, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And when I went through the process this time of writing the book, I spent a lot of time, thinking about how did I want to use the tools that I use
Mhm.
regularly, and what's reasonable, what's not. So I'm curious what you think from a, what's the difference in your mind and in the way we should think about this really around an AI written book versus an AI supported human authorship, for a book.
Yeah. I actually hit that wall this weekend. I'm working on a novel sci-fi, and I've been using
Mm,
AI a lot to just learn about, like, things I want to happen when we colonize Mars and
mhm,
whatnot.
mhm,
So, I was gonna enter this contest, literary contest, and the book, I've worked really hard to make sure that it's my voice, unique,
mm,
different, and I got to, like, I stayed up till midnight to get this done, and I'm uploading it, and I got to the last question, and it said in all caps, "You must say that this book was not written or assisted by AI," and I told my writer group when I decided not to enter this contest. I mean, I felt like by penalty of death.
yeah.
Like,
No,
you
no,
don't
no,
even
I
know,
get it.
and,
Yeah,
also, if you upload to Amazon, it says, "Did you use any AI in this book?" And it's super ambiguous, like, what does it even mean? And so, like, I'm like, "Oh, no." So I actually talked to our founders about this, like, "What does this really mean?" Because I don't think my writing reads like AI. It doesn't look, it's
right.
very, I worked really hard on actually creating prompts that generate my
Yeah.
voice, and my
Mhm.
characters, like, have catchphrases that only I made, AI didn't write this.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think, and what, Giacomo was telling me is, like, you can't tell if you are a craftsperson and you are using AI like you use your pens and your
Mhm,
encyclopedias and your thesauri
mhm.
and your spell check and your Grammarly, it's something that you had to work on to create.
Right, right.
And these huge blinking, flashing warnings are there for sort of the opposite reason, which is this
Yeah.
AI generated book. And I went to a book event with a woman who wrote, a Random House author, wrote a book about Lorne Michaels, the
Mm,
founder of Saturday Night Live. They
right.
posted the book, and within a week, there were 7 copies of, nearly an identical, book
Mm,
by fictional authors who could not be traced, by, like, one of them had
mm.
a cover photo of a guy with white hair who was clearly not Lorne Michaels, and, it just, like,
Hmm,
this kind of, like, and what we assume these people did is they said, "Write a book in the," like you're saying, "in the style of," or you can even pirate the Kindle book and say, "Rewrite this
right.
enough so it's unique."
Yeah,
That is awful.
interesting. Yeah. No, I
And,
mean, no question,
that's like,
that's obviously across the line, right? I mean, I see that
yeah.
one, right? Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
is a lot. A lot of people are doing it.
Mm,
Amazon is just, and they're trying to beat it
hmm,
back with sticks. At Street Live, we were
yeah.
really struggling with this too. Like, how do you not let this stuff on the platform?
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. I mean, I had earlier this year, I had a client who had contracted for me to develop some thought leadership content for them. And right at the end, when we were negotiating the contract, they came back to me with a statement that says, and we won't allow any use of AI tools in any way while you're writing this. And I literally just called them up and I said, I'm sending the contract back. I'm not signing it, because I don't even actually know how to separate this anymore. It's a part of my workflow. If I have a question, I go choose one of the tools to answer the question. I'm not using it to write. So I'm not telling it, here, go write this paper, but it's an integral part of my research process now to use these tools to find information, make sure information's correct. I mean, all these different things. And you get to the point where it's so integrated. I don't, yeah, I'm not pushing a button to write a book, but I am certainly using those tools to make the writing more efficient and more effective and better, frankly.
Yeah, there was a study recently that, showed that books that had an AI developmental edit and copy edit actually performed better than those that didn't. I mean,
Mm,
you're really improving your work. It's a tool. It's like word processors. I mean, use some discernment because
yeah,
yeah, it can create a
yeah.
lot of prose really fast, but it can create a lot of really bad prose really fast.
Yes, it can.
So you need to, the human has to be in charge. And I think that this sort of, once we figure out how to like discern what really is it, between these two things, and I think it's going to shake out in the
Yeah.
next year to 2 years. It's just like again at the beginning of ebooks, what happened is that the market was completely flooded all of a sudden with mostly out of
Mm,
print old stuff, but it
yeah.
competed with new stuff, and it was really it was highly competitive with authors, and people got all bent out of shape, and then it kind of leveled out because at the end of the day, quality is going to rise.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully.
Yeah,
But I
hopefully.
mean, music went through the same thing. I mean, all this, right? I mean, I'm a longtime blogger, and back when I first started in early 2000s, I was very careful to put, what kind of Creative Commons licensing you could and what you could do with the content and can you reuse it. But honestly, there was no way back then to know if somebody scraped something off of my blog and reused it somewhere and didn't credit me. Unless I accidentally found it, the chances were I wouldn't know anyway, right? So we've evolved a lot from there.
For sure, and you can use AMLET for a blog, you can use it for artwork, you can use it
Mm.
um, I did ask, I said, "Oh, will it, like, be monitoring all the time for piracy?" And they stared at me and they said, "The internet is very large."
It would be, yeah, that would be, you'd need some serious crawlers to get that one done, I guess,
It's
but
not the problem we're
mm,
solving, but, we are
mm,
solving the problem of, like, if you're publishing a book, there aren't that many places where books go, you're gonna know,
yeah.
be able to identify.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, and so, self-publishing, indie creators, I do like that term better, niche expertise, it seems like that's just exploded over the last few years. I mean, how does AI help from that perspective? How does it make content more discoverable? And SEO is something we've talked about for a while, but obviously that's shifting too, for books and for other long form content. How does this make it better for those indie publishers?
Yes and no. I mean, you have to like dive into the tech, a little bit. One thing that I've done in my practice with the authors I work with is I've created a bunch of very specialized AI chatbots,
Mm,
for different things. Like there are certain rules, like you got to optimize an Amazon listing in a certain way. And like, so I gave it all
mhm,
those rules and told it what to do so you can create
mm,
an SEO optimized Amazon listing. I've done the same thing for like an in selling Instagram presence for authors that's not just pretty,
mm,
but actually will sell.
mm,
And branding as well. Like how can authors stand out? And I really feel like for me, it allows me to like convey my expertise as like somebody who's been in publishing for a long time, but to create a tool that any author can use quick and easy to
mm,
improve their chances to make their book more visible. Um,
mm,
Even without all the AI stuff, we're in an age right now where there's just such a huge crowd of books, like so many books
yeah,
being published all the time that I do think that there are some of these new ways that authors can multiply their presence using AI to help them do more posting, to
mm,
identify new markets, to refine their selling tools, and use it the same way you say you wrote your book. Use it as your companion. Like,
mm,
I would really like to sell this into automotive stations. How do I do that?
mm,
It helps you figure out things that you would be a lot harder to figure out on your own
yeah,
as an author, as an indie.
yeah. As an indie, yeah. I mean, that makes sense, and it certainly, I can see opportunities for, after you've published how you can help grow your business, but I know it's still, like, evolving too, and there aren't a lot of tools that are specifically built for this. It's more, how do I use this tool in a way that benefits me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm working on that myself. It's like I'm trying to create all the parts and pieces that a publisher needs
Mhm.
to know, and like my branding stuff is all based on what I did as an acquisitions editor,
Mm.
in like selling in authors. I do think that indie authors should still be mindful of like what really works in traditional publishing. and what wouldn't necessarily. So,
Mm,
that's the thing I think that's really hard as an indie is that there's just you don't know what you don't know until you know.
yeah.
And even traditionally published authors typically take 3 or 4 books before they get it nailed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that I think that's fair, and it certainly is different from what we've seen. So, I'm curious if we kinda take a step back and think about this from an author perspective. I mean, what is a sustainable business model for an author going forward, in this kind of AI saturated world that we live in now?
Yeah, I usually talk to 2 sort of there's, like, 3 2 major buckets that authors fall into. Either they're, like, the nonfiction expert author, and you have a business, or you have other
Mm,
products, and in that case, the book is usually better representing you, like you're saying, like, gives you credibility, gives
right.
you something to talk about. You use it in your talks and your, podcasts, and,
Mm,
the book itself may not make money, but it will create a piece of marketing that, you can stand on, right?
yeah.
So that's sort of on one side. On the fiction side, it's interesting too because fiction requires usually genre fiction, and I'm talking about romance, sci-fi, thrillers, that kind of thing,
Mm, yeah.
requires prolific authors. So the
Mm,
business model that is working in fiction is series, multiple books around a
mm,
character, building an author brand where you deliver a very specific fictional experience and like I say, you
mm,
can use these AI tools to help you plot, edit faster, even
mm,
design covers, bring things to market a lot faster. So on the fiction side, it's like that. I think that you could do that on nonfiction too if you were doing like,
mm,
like I did instructional woodworking books a long time ago, but like if you're doing a
mm,
series for the same audience. And so like
right.
if you wanted to build a career as an author around a book idea, you need to really specialize and you need to grow your list. And I still think there was a methodology I've been using, I don't know, it's maybe 20 years old now, 15 years old, is the thousand true fans idea. And the
Mm,
idea is that if you're selling direct to consumers and you're building the list on your own, you're going to make like 75 or 80% of that book list price, as opposed to if you're selling it through bookstores or retailers, where you're going to end up with like 20 or 30% or even less, which
mm,
is less than you would make if it was traditionally published
mm,
because of all the markups and all the people in between you and the book sale.
yeah.
So, for authors to really succeed is sort of building their own audiences. And the other big strategy that I advocate is this idea of literary citizenship is that authors support other authors and
Mm,
promote each other's books and promote each other's works. And you create a community that's like not hierarchical. It's not all coming to a publisher. It's kind of like these networks of people who recommend books. And
mm,
authors, if you are an author and you recommend a book, that has way more weight than if you're not an author and you recommend a book. So
yeah.
people
No, that's
trust
fair.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I just started, setting up, another newsletter. I have a couple already, but a newsletter, and I was gonna use Beehive this time, and that was actually one of the things that attracted me to that is the fact that you get all this cross referral, inside of that community that helps you grow that much faster than, say, a Substack or, one of the other platforms. So I would imagine the same kind of thing would work really well if you have an author community and you can help each other in whatever genre you're in. That would certainly, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me anyway.
Even if it's just a dozen people, because, you can
Mm,
maybe write 1 book a year, and if everyone writes then you always have something to promote,
mhm.
and you can keep the engine going. Like, a single author has a hard time, it takes a long time to write a book,
Mm.
and then you get tired, your audience is a little like, "Again?" Um, so,
Yeah,
they it gives you something to stand on. But
yeah,
it's human AI together, human
yeah.
creativity.
Yeah, well, and I mean, just look, and again, I just started working on this with this new newsletter platform, and even in their Slack community, I was amazed at the amount of information I could get out of all that had been shared on there, and people that had very similar problems that had already been solved, and I can just search that, and so having a knowledge base to work from is a great way to accelerate the value of what you get out of that platform.
Definitely. And like what you're saying with Beehive is true of Substack in a way, and it's also true in Kit
Mm,
and in Ghost. Like all of those
mm,
platforms have that discoverability, and
right.
I just think that's really interesting. It's something that's helping build audiences.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so if you were talking to, an author or somebody who really wants to build a business around authorship and, content creation, what kind of advice would you give them now as they're thinking about going into this?
Well, it depends on who they are, but I am always encouraging authors to think like a publisher. And like if you are really interested in learning how to bring a book out to market, can you do it for other people too? And like it
Mhm,
doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a service provider, but you use your discernment, build it. I have a couple clients who are both one's doing like a compilation journal and another one is doing um a literary magazine, and it's
mm,
just a way, to as I said, it's that 1 book a year. If you wanted to seriously make money as an author, it's really hard, and so you kinda need a
mm,
critical mass of stuff, and you
mm,
need to, keep it going. So, you don't the business arrangements are interesting, but I would do that, but, like I said before, the other is, like, it promotes your business, or on the other hand, you're, like, a very prolific, fiction
yeah.
writer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna be a prolific nonfiction writer, but I think a book a year is sort of a target that I've had in my mind as and something that I think is doable. Took me about 10 months on the last one, which is, not bad considering how long it took to write the one earlier, so but maybe I
Yeah.
just know more about it now, I don't know. Anyway, good. Well, I mean, that's all the time we have today, really good conversation and very interesting to me and timely. But before I go, one of the things that I really like to do is have you recommend somebody to the audience. Could be a thought leader or author, book, blog, podcast, that you think the audience would get value out of.
Yeah, I think it's totally worth revisiting Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, which he wrote, I
Mm,
think, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, about what the internet is doing to our brains. Because I think everything he wrote about is accelerating now in the age of AI. A little bit of it is a bit dated, but it really thinks
mm,
especially about how we as humans process reading and process through writing.
mm,
So I would totally recommend Nicholas
mm.
Carr's book.
Yeah, great recommendation. Thanks. And I really appreciate you joining today. Very, very interesting conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.